Revenge is sweetest when served cold and calculated. Her name was Helen Davies. She was 26 years old. 2 years ago, Helen had been a bright-eyed employee at a mobile phone company in Manchester. Ambitious and eager, she met Anton Reed, her supervisor, a man 3 years her senior. Anton was admired by many, handsome, confident, and seemingly dependable. He took Helen under his wing, teaching her the ropes of the trade, and soon, their relationship blurred the lines between professional and personal. They married quickly, and Helen's world seemed complete. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect union lay a growing tension. Anton had old-fashioned views about marriage, insisting Helen quit her job to focus solely on the home. She complied, despite the pangs of losing her independence. Their marriage, instead of blossoming, began to wilt under the weight of Anton's coldness and dismissive attitude. Helen's sacrifices went unnoticed, her efforts met with silence or criticism. The warm love she once imagined soon turned into a suffocating cage. One chill autumn evening, Helen found herself facing the first true spark of humiliation that would ignite her path to revenge. She was heavily pregnant, 9 months along, and yet Anton's contempt was palpable. Returning home late, reeking of alcohol, he barely acknowledged the dinner she'd prepared. When she shared the news of their baby, expecting joy, he recoiled in disgust. "A child? What have you done?" he spat. "I don't want this. If you're going to have it, raise it yourself." His words struck like daggers, cutting through the fragile hope Helen had held on to. But the cruelest blow came when she found a receipt from a local motel, tucked carelessly in his shirt pocket. The truth hit her like a freight train. Anton was cheating. Their marriage, their vows, all a facade. The man she loved had been living a double life, treating her like a possession, a servant, while his true affections belonged elsewhere. Helen's world shattered, but from the ruins, a fierce resolve began to take shape. She would not be the victim of Anton's betrayal and scorn. Quietly, she started gathering evidence, piecing together his infidelities, his lies. Though her body ached with pregnancy and her spirit was bruised, her mind sharpened like a blade. She was planning her reckoning. One rainy evening, Helen received a call that changed everything. It was her father, Richard Davies, a powerful CEO recently returned from Canada. He revealed a secret inheritance. A substantial sum, enough to secure her and her child's future without Anton's shadow looming over them. Suddenly, the balance of power shifted. Helen was no longer the helpless wife. She was a woman armed with the means to fight back. Fueled by this newfound strength, Helen confronted Anton. When he belittled her cooking and cruelly mocked her swollen belly, calling it monstrous, she didn't flinch. Instead, she handed him divorce papers with icy calm. "Sign it," she demanded. "I'm done being the woman you look down on." Anton sneered, enraged, but the fire in Helen's eyes told him this was no empty threat. She left that night, taking her dignity, and her unborn child, with her. Months later, with her baby in her arms and her father's support behind her, Helen's life took another unexpected turn. A television documentary about her father's empire aired, revealing her new status and wealth. Anton, stumbling in his own mess of debts and failed relationships, saw his chance for greed. He called, demanding money, trying to claw back a life he had discarded. But Helen was no longer the naive girl who once adored him. She faced him with cold truth, exposing his hypocrisy, his lies, and his betrayals. Anton's pleas fell on deaf ears. She blocked him out, determined to build a life of dignity and strength. Helen's story was no longer one of victimhood but of quiet, relentless revenge. The woman who had been mocked and discarded was now the one holding all the cards, ready to expose the man who thought he could break her, and win. Helen's days had once been filled with hope and excitement, but that all changed the moment Anton's true nature revealed itself. Their marriage, which had begun with whispered promises and tender smiles, quickly became a battlefield littered with cold silences and biting words. When Helen had agreed to leave her job, it was out of love and trust, though deep down, a small voice in her heart warned her to be cautious. She gave up her independence, believing Anton's assurances that he would provide for them both. Instead, she found herself trapped in a lonely house in a modest suburb of Manchester, doing endless chores for a man who barely looked at her. One evening, Helen fell ill. Her body ached, and exhaustion weighed heavy on her limbs. She stayed in bed, hoping Anton would understand, or at least offer some sympathy. But when he came home late, reeking of alcohol, his gaze was sharp and unforgiving. "What are you doing lying there?" he snapped, kicking her blanket aside. "You're not working, so get up and make some food." Helen's heart sank. She had never imagined marriage would feel like servitude. She forced herself out of bed, tears burning behind her eyes, but she swallowed her pain, determined to keep the peace. Days passed, and her health worsened until she discovered she was pregnant. For a fleeting moment, happiness filled her. Maybe this child would change everything. But that hope shattered faster than it came. Anton's reaction was brutal. When she told him, he sneered. "A child? You've ruined everything. I don't want this. You'll raise it on your own." The words echoed in Helen's mind long after he stormed away, leaving her feeling small and worthless. Then by chance she found the receipt hidden in his shirt pocket, a bill from a cheap motel on the edge of town. Her world tilted, every doubt she'd had suddenly confirmed. Anton was cheating, and worse, had been doing so throughout their marriage. The man she had loved, who had taught her how to navigate her job and life, had only ever been using her. That night, Helen lay awake, her mind racing. How had she been so blind? Had all the late nights at work, the dinners together, the soft words ever meant anything? Or had she been nothing more than a convenient cover, a way for him to maintain a respectable image? The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. But with that pain came a flicker of something else. Anger, cold and steady, beginning to smolder beneath her skin. She would not let him break her. Not this time. Helen's days blurred into a haze of quiet desperation, but beneath the surface, a fierce determination was growing. Every glance Anton cast her way, every cold word he muttered, only fueled the fire burning inside her. She had sacrificed so much, her career, her independence, her peace of mind, and now, faced with his betrayal and cruelty, she refused to crumble. She began to watch him closely, searching for proof, any sign that could confirm the affair she suspected. But Anton was careful, meticulous even. His phone never left his side. He answered calls in hushed tones and slipped away to private corners when messages came through. His once cluttered desk was now immaculate, betraying no hint of secrets. Helen's hope of catching him unguarded dimmed, but she did not give up. Instead, she turned to small details. Receipts left carelessly in coat pockets, unfamiliar names whispered on his lips during drunken evenings, and the faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers. Each tiny clue was another brick in the wall of evidence she built silently, piece by piece. She was no longer the trusting wife. She was a detective in her own home, gathering the truth. Her body, swollen with pregnancy, carried the weight of her pain and anger. Anton's dismissiveness and cruelty intensified. He mocked her cooking, dismissed her efforts around the house, and made cruel remarks about her growing belly. "You look like a monster," he spat once, eyes cold and mocking. The words stung, but Helen held on to them, filing them away as fuel for the battle she knew was coming. Yet amidst the storm, a lifeline appeared unexpectedly. One rainy afternoon, her phone rang. It was her father, Richard Davies, a man she hadn't spoken to in months. His voice was grave but steady as he told her something that shook her world once again. A secret inheritance from a distant relative, a fortune worth millions, now hers to claim. Helen sat back, stunned. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope, not just for herself, but for her unborn child. This was the leverage she needed, the power to break free from Anton's grip and rewrite the story of her life. The scales were tipping, and Helen was ready to tip them all the way. That evening, Helen sat alone in the quiet of her small flat, the rain tapping softly against the windowpane. The weight of her pregnancy pressed on her body, but her mind was sharper than it had been in months. The news from her father burned in her thoughts. An inheritance worth millions, enough to give her the freedom she so desperately craved. For the first time, she felt a flicker of control in a life that had lately been defined by Anton's cruelty. But freedom meant confrontation, and Helen knew that to claim what was hers, to protect her child, she would have to face Anton head-on. Days later, the moment arrived. Anton came home late, reeking of alcohol, his usual smug expression replaced by something darker, impatience, irritation. Helen sat at the dinner table, quietly eating the bland meal she had prepared, trying to avoid conflict. But Anton's temper exploded without warning. "This is disgusting," he barked, slamming his fork down so hard the cutlery clattered against the plate. "What kind of woman can't even cook a proper meal?" Helen looked up, confusion and hurt swirling in her chest. She had been careful, trying to make meals healthy and mild for the sake of the baby, but Anton's reaction was merciless. Before she could respond, he sneered, voice dripping with venom. "And look at you, your belly's like some monstrous thing. I don't want a woman carrying that around. If you're having this baby, you'll raise it yourself." The words hit Helen like a punch to the gut. The malice in his eyes, the cruel smile that stretched across his face. It was as if he took twisted pleasure in her suffering. All the sacrifices she'd made, the pain she'd endured, now reduced to mockery and spite. But Helen was done hiding her pain. Swiftly, she stood and retreated to her room. She returned moments later, holding a thick packet of papers in her trembling hands. Her voice was steady but firm as she thrust the divorce papers toward Anton. "Here," she said coldly. "Sign them. I'm done being the woman you look down on." Anton's face contorted in disbelief and fury. "What the hell is this? Where did this come from?" Helen met his glare without flinching. "It was your idea, remember? Now sign it. I'll submit it tomorrow." His cheeks flushed red with anger, but Helen held her ground. This was no longer a game to her. The woman who had been mocked, belittled, and betrayed was now ready to reclaim her dignity and make Anton regret every moment he had scorned her. Anton's shock quickly morphed into fury, his eyes blazing with disbelief as he snatched the divorce papers from Helen's hands. "You think you can just throw this in my face and walk away?" he snarled, voice low and menacing. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You'll regret this. You'll never survive without me, and with a baby to care for." Helen met his threats with a calmness that belied the storm raging inside her. For years she had endured his coldness, his dismissals and his betrayals, but now the tables were turning. She wasn't the scared, obedient wife anymore. She was a woman scorned, ready to fight back on her own terms. "I'll be fine," she said quietly but firmly. "You don't get to decide what happens next. I'm not the one who's been cruel and unfaithful." Anton's face twisted in rage, his knuckles whitening as he clenched his fists. But Helen's resolve was unshakable. She watched him struggle with his pride and anger, knowing that beneath it all he was stunned. Stunned that she had found the courage to stand up to him. Without another word, Anton began filling in the blanks on the divorce papers, his movements stiff and reluctant. "Here," he muttered, thrusting the signed documents toward her. "If this is what you want, it's yours." Helen took the papers with a steady hand, a cold satisfaction washing over her. She had expected resistance, bargaining, maybe even desperation, but Anton's submission, his quick surrender, was evidence of just how much power she had gained. For the first time she felt in control of her own destiny. The next day, Helen filed the divorce papers at the local registry office, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and triumph. Leaving their shared home, she packed her belongings and moved in with her parents in a quiet town outside Manchester. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild her life away from Anton's shadow. Anton called 3 times that day, desperation creeping into his voice, but Helen ignored every ring. She was done with his lies, his cruelty, and his control. In that silence she found strength. The woman who had once been dismissed and disrespected was now preparing for the most important fight of her life. And nothing would stop her. Alone in her parents' cozy home, Helen felt a strange mix of relief and lingering pain. The familiar surroundings offered comfort, yet the wounds Anton had inflicted still throbbed beneath the surface. She often found herself staring out the window, the soft English drizzle blurring the world outside, mirroring her own blurred emotions. The betrayal, the coldness, the years of silent suffering, they all weighed heavily on her heart. Her mind replayed the harshest moments, Anton's venomous words about her swollen belly, his careless dismissal of her pregnancy, and the unmistakable sting of discovering that motel receipt. How had she been so blind? How had she allowed herself to be used and discarded so easily? These questions haunted her, but with them came a fierce determination. She refused to be a forgotten casualty of Anton's selfishness. Helen's thoughts often drifted to the child growing inside her, a symbol of hope amid the wreckage. She vowed to protect this baby, to build a life far removed from the shadows of her past. But beneath that vow simmered a darker resolve. Anton had underestimated her. He had thought she was weak, that she would crumble beneath his cruelty. Now in the quiet moments she nurtured a plan, a silent promise to make him pay for every insult, every betrayal. The anger was no longer raw and chaotic. It had settled into a cold, precise force. Helen knew that revenge wasn't about loud confrontations or bitter arguments. It was about control, strategy, and exposing the hypocrisy of those who had wronged her. She would reclaim her dignity not with screams, but with calculated moves that would leave Anton powerless and exposed. Her father's unexpected call had been a turning point. The inheritance he revealed was more than money. It was a lifeline and a weapon. With those funds, Helen could secure her future and, more importantly, strip Anton of the control he so desperately clung to. The scales were tipping, and Helen was ready to tip them all the way. As days turned into weeks, Helen's resolve hardened. She began quietly assembling the pieces of her comeback, preparing to rise from the ashes of her shattered marriage stronger, wiser, and utterly unstoppable. The woman who had once been humiliated and betrayed was no longer a victim. She was becoming a force to be reckoned with. One damp morning, as Helen sorted through letters on the kitchen table, a particular envelope caught her eye. It was plain and unassuming, but the postmark was unfamiliar. Curiosity piqued. She opened it carefully and found inside a thick stack of documents, bank statements, hotel receipts, and emails. Her breath caught as she realized these were records linked to Anton's secret life. Someone was feeding her proof, meticulously gathered and indisputable. Helen's heart pounded with a mix of shock and vindication. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was an opportunity, a gift handed to her on a silver platter. Suddenly, the tangled web of lies and deception Anton had woven began to unravel before her very eyes. She wasn't alone in this fight. Someone had been watching, waiting, and now Helen had the leverage she desperately needed. The documents detailed Anton's affair with a junior colleague at his company, a woman far younger and more reckless than Helen had imagined. The receipts placed him at motels, restaurants, and secret rendezvous across the city, confirming what Helen had long suspected but could never prove. With every page she read, the cold fire inside her grew brighter. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated deceit, an insult to her intelligence and dignity. Helen spent hours poring over the papers, each piece of evidence sharpening her resolve. She could see the pattern now. Anton's lies, his manipulation, all laid bare. The hypocrisy of a man who preached responsibility yet acted with reckless disregard. She smiled grimly, knowing she held the power to expose him, to bring his carefully constructed facade crashing down. With this new arsenal, Helen's strategy took shape. She would not confront Anton in anger or desperation. Instead, she would wield this evidence quietly, methodically, ensuring that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable and devastating. The man who had mocked her, dismissed her, and betrayed her would finally face the consequences of his actions. For the first time since their marriage began, Helen felt truly in control. The seeds of her revenge had been planted, watered with patience and precision. The quiet retaliation she envisioned was no longer a distant dream. It was a looming reality, ready to burst forth and shatter Anton's world. Helen moved with careful precision, her every step calculated to maximize the impact of the evidence she now possessed. She knew that exposing Anton's deceit would be a delicate operation. A misstep could give him a chance to spin the story, to regain control. But Helen was determined to make sure that would never happen. She began by reaching out discreetly to a trusted solicitor, someone recommended by her father, who understood the complexities of high-stakes divorce and the nuances of infidelity cases. Helen handed over the documents, watching as the solicitor's expression shifted from professional neutrality to quiet admiration. Here was a woman not just seeking justice, but ready to dismantle a man who had betrayed her on every level. Word began to spread quietly within Anton's company. Helen's solicitor had contacts, people who could corroborate the evidence and apply pressure where it hurt most. Helen didn't need to shout from the rooftops. The whispers behind closed doors did the damage. Anton's reputation, carefully cultivated over years, started to crumble as colleagues exchanged knowing glances and hushed conversations. At the same time, Helen focused on her personal life. Supported by her father and surrounded by the warmth of her family, she nurtured her unborn child and rebuilt her confidence. She enrolled in evening classes to sharpen her business skills, preparing to take her place in her father's company once the divorce was finalized. She was no longer the naive young woman who had fallen for Anton's charm. She was becoming a formidable force in her own right. Anton, meanwhile, was visibly unraveling. His calls went unanswered, his messages ignored. Rumors of his affair and the impending divorce began to seep into social circles, tarnishing his image. He tried to maintain a facade of control, but beneath it, fear and desperation simmered. Helen watched from a distance, her resolve hardening. She had the power now, not just to end their marriage on her terms, but to expose the hypocrisy and cruelty that had defined it. Every whispered secret, every shattered lie was another step toward her ultimate justice. The quiet retaliation she had planned was unfolding perfectly, and soon, Anton would have nowhere left to hide. As the weeks passed, the tension between Helen and Anton grew unbearable, though they no longer spoke directly. The evidence Helen had gathered and quietly circulated had done more damage than she ever imagined possible. Anton's carefully built reputation within the company was crumbling like dry stone under relentless rain. Colleagues who once admired him now regarded him with suspicion or outright disdain. Invitations to social gatherings stopped coming. Casual greetings were replaced by cold nods or outright avoidance. Helen, meanwhile, was transforming. The woman who once bore the brunt of Anton's cruelty had blossomed into a confident, poised figure. Her evenings were spent studying business management, preparing to take her rightful place in her father's company. Her days were filled with the quiet joy of motherhood, her baby's soft coos a soothing balm to the scars left by betrayal. But the real climax was yet to come. One chilly morning, Helen received an invitation, not from Anton, but from the company's board of directors. They wanted to meet her, to discuss the future of the company in light of recent events. The message was clear. She was now a key player, a force to be reckoned with. The same board that had once turned a blind eye to Anton's misdemeanors was now inviting Helen to shape the company's path forward. Anton, on the other hand, was a shadow of the man he once was. His lavish lifestyle had drained into debt. His new marriage was strained, and the debts piled high. Rumors of job loss and financial ruin spread like wildfire. He had tried to intimidate Helen, to threaten her into silence, but she remained unshaken. Her lawyer had made it clear. She would not only pursue the divorce but also demand full child support and compensation for the emotional torment she endured. The battle lines were drawn. Helen's quiet retaliation had reached its peak. The man who once mocked her, dismissed her, and betrayed her was now exposed, isolated and powerless. And Helen, mother, daughter, and woman reborn, stood ready to claim the justice she deserved. The storm was coming, and there was no turning back. The day Helen stepped into the sleek boardroom overlooking Manchester's skyline, she felt a surge of calm power. The years of pain and betrayal had forged her into someone unrecognizable from the frightened girl who once begged for Anton's approval. Now every eye was on her, not with pity but with respect. The directors, seasoned, sharp and pragmatic, listened intently as Helen laid out her vision for the company's future. She spoke with confidence, her voice steady, her ideas clear. This was more than business. It was her declaration of independence, a statement that she would no longer be defined by her past, but by the strength she had forged from it. Meanwhile, Anton's world unraveled in ways he never anticipated. News of the divorce settlement leaked. Helen had secured not only full custody and generous child support, but also a substantial financial settlement from her inheritance, protected carefully by legal counsel. His attempts to regain control had failed spectacularly. The man who once sneered at her swollen belly now found himself burdened with debts and isolation. Late one evening, Helen received a final call from Anton. His voice was strained, desperate, a sharp contrast to the confident man he had once been. "Please," he begged. "Let's find some way to move past all this." Helen's reply was steady, unwavering. "It's too late for that, Anton. You chose your path and now you must live with the consequences. I'm done being your victim." She hung up, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. The battle was over, but her life was just beginning. Helen had reclaimed her dignity. exposed the hypocrisy that had once imprisoned her, and carved out a future filled with hope and strength. As she cradled her sleeping child, Helen smiled softly. Revenge had been hers, not in cruelty or chaos, but in justice, resilience, and a quiet, unyielding comeback. The woman who had once been broken was now unbreakable. And this was only the beginning.